Welcome back. Let me welcome Professor Enrico Giovannini, who is our keynote speaker for today of our conference. Enrico is a full professor of economics and statistics at the University of Rome Tor Vergata. He's also the scientific director of the Italian Alliance for Sustainable Development, ASVIS. Also, Enrico has held several positions at the government level. So he was the Italy Minister of Labor and Social Policies in 2013-14. And then he was also the Minister of Infrastructure and Sustainable Mobility from 21 and 22. And he has ample expertise on economics, public policy, and sustainable development. So, Enrico, really, we are very happy to have you with us today in our conference. We, as a network of researchers in Europe, Mediterranean, and Africa, we're trying really to promote sustainability, inclusion, responsibility, and transparency. And this is work we've been doing with Carlos Sessa, that you know very well, your fellow countryman. And we've been working since 2019 to develop a logic of sustainability, even when the SDGs were not there yet. It was the MDGs, Millennium Development Goals, in 2009 and 2010. And then, of course, in 2015, they were the SDGs. And you remember the discussions in MedPro where we wanted to develop this new concept. We call it inclusion and sustainability through the complementarities between Europe, Mediterranean, and Africa. And our idea back then was to work on those. So Enrico is the expert to give us new ideas on sustainability. But then when I see your title is Sustainability Life, ? Here I give the floor to Enrico, and hopefully you will give us more than the sustainability, beyond sustainability for post-SDGs. So here you go.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be with you and to learn about the work that you are doing. And I followed the presentations this morning. So I will try to adjust a little bit my presentation in real time, just to try to connect what I wanted to talk about to what you are doing. Thank you for the presentation. Actually, it happened that in 2014, when I stepped down as Minister of Labor in the latest government, I was asked by the European Commission to contribute to the design of the research and innovation policies around the forthcoming SDGs, because the SDGs were not yet finally established. And in 2014, by the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, to contribute to the preparation of the very last two targets of the very last SDG about statistics, with the report World That Counts, that helped in pushing the world agenda on statistics for sustainable development. But I've been dealing with these issues since 2001, when I moved to Paris as chief statistician of the OECD. And I just mentioning this because in my last slides, I will go back to this issue, relating what has been done so far with what is happening right now at the UN and at the EU levels. It doesn't work. Maybe I'm too far. Okay, great. Yeah. You know this famous sentence from Einstein, and it's absolutely true that we have to change the way in which we look at how we work, and even how we conceptualize the way of addressing different issues. The first point I would like to make is the definition of complex system, This is just extracted from Wikipedia some time ago. And the key point is that complex systems are systems whose behavior is intrinsically difficult to model due to the dependencies, competitions, relationships, and other types of interactions between the different parts of the system. And as we want to deal with economic, social, environmental, and institutional domains, the system that we have to describe and then try to manage is very, very complex. Maybe it's better if, okay. This is a slide that I frequently use to show that we didn't get to the point where we are, a world with low resilience and high risk, just making one wrong decision. The result was where we are now is a result of a sequence of decisions. And therefore, if we want to move from a low resilience and high risk world towards a high resilience and low risk world, we have to go through a very long set of decisions that can revert and change some trends. You are moving them, right? Okay. I make a reference here to the annual report by the World Economic Forum on the Global Risks Report, based on the interviews on a lot of people around the world. And as you can see, there is a big difference between the 2 years scenario and the 10-year scenario, because if you look at the 10 years perspective, 4 out of 5 most risky elements are all related to the environmental dimension. So of course, we are in the middle of interstate wars and conflicts and so on and so forth. But we have to remind ourselves that in 10 years' time, the environmental issues and problems will become very, very difficult to manage. And in fact, according to the experts, so far only 5% of experts think that we are going to face a catastrophic situation in the next 2 years. But if we go to the long term, 10 years, almost 62% of experts think that we will face either catastrophic or very turbulent situation. Therefore, I didn't think that I could say something like that. Trump is right. It's a messy world. He was referring to Ukraine war, but unfortunately, the messy situation goes much more beyond the drama that we are seeing in Ukraine. Should I tell you to move? Okay, next slide, please. Yes. Years ago, at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, we tried to develop an overall framework to deal with risks and resilience. It happened after a conference that I had organized on behalf of the Commission in October 2015, after which the head of cabinet of President Juncker, for whom I was working, said to me, you have to stop talking about sustainability and resilience because the Commission will never embrace these concepts. So I stopped working with them. I started working with the JRC. And we built this very simple scheme where you see the time of exposure and the disturbance intensity. Next one. Think about the different crises. Next slide, please. One back. Okay, think about 2008, the financial crisis. That was a sort of classical crisis that we had to face. Next one. And okay. It's not working. Can I come there? Because there are a lot of animations, and I think that is better if I use the computer. So in 2010, what happened in 2010? Do you remember? What? Yeah, the Euro crisis. Okay. Thank you very much. Yes, the Euro crisis, you remember. 2015. What happened? No, the Euro crisis was 2010. No? Migration. It was the asylum crisis due to the war in Syria, and the flow of migrants was equal to 0.1% of the total EU population. Almost nothing. But this is an example of non-linear phenomena. 2020, of course, pandemic. 2022, the war. 2000 is just bad luck, or there is something that is broken. And I changed this presentation, just putting the Trump effect that we are facing these days. Now, the point is that if you think that what you are facing is a small or short duration, you can manage it. You can absorb it. But if a crisis is bigger or stands longer, you need to adapt. And if it is very big and very long, you need to transform. So we reclassified our policies on policies that manage to prepare, promote, and then transform, of course. So if you look at these two papers, you can find our approach. And nobody cared about these issues up until the pandemic started. And now I think you know why resilience in European policies became so central, because the cabinet of von der Leyen picked up our work, and then the national plans for recovery and resilience under the Next Generation EU have been developed around Europe. I assume that you know the 2030 agenda and the three principles of integration, universality, and participation, but maybe you have never connected the SDGs with this scheme that is well known to ecological economists since 1980s. This is derived from Costanza and others. And you see the box is the planetary boundaries. And what we do as humans, we take the human capital, the social capital, the natural capital, and the produced capital, the economic one, and we combine them in a production process, and we produce GDP. The GDP is reinvested and or is consumed for our well-being. This is what all the macroeconomic textbooks talk about. But the point is that the scheme is much more complex. While we produce and while we consume, we create waste. And waste, physical waste, have an impact on people's well-being, but also on that the model that creates physical wastes is the same that creates human wastes, then you need to add one box, which is what I called the social system services. Peace, vision of the future, trust. And while we create wastes, we weaken our capacity of providing social system services, exactly like the physical wastes reduces the capacity of the earth to produce the ecosystem services. Now, the point is that if you put the 17 goals here, the goals are not anymore just a list of targets, but is a way to change the functioning of the system. This is why it's so complicated. This is why it's so difficult. This is why this change is producing pushback that we are observing around the world, because it's a revolutionary plan. And in fact, the United States left the 2030 Agenda commitments in February this year. Now, the situation around us is very well known. ASVIS produces every year 3 reports, one, the annual on the state of the world and European and Italy SDGs. The second one that is being presented today, we go down to the regional and city level. And then the spring report that tries to look at the future. We know that we are facing huge challenges in terms of conflicts. Military expenditure went up very, very dramatically. And according to the SDG most recent report produced by UN, we are on track only for 18 goals and for 18 targets, sorry, and for 80% of targets, and while for 18% we are going in the opposite direction. Just one remark. As I said, for 9 years I was the chief statistician of the OECD, and I know that because of a particular episode in that period, I will go to hell. Because God will not forgive one of my several sins. And sins, yes. Why? Because in 2008, we were discussing about how to modify, adjourn the system of national accounts. And we had a very heated discussion on whether the military pluriannual expenditures, so not bullets, but tanks, had to be recorded as a consumption or an investment. And I had pushed to have them recorded as an investment for a reason of coherence within the national account scheme. And we won the battle, let's say. If I had lost that, everybody would have said, oh, GDP, great success. But unfortunately, as we won, the military expenditure in Russia compensated completely the peace economy, and therefore you don't see any impact of sanctions on the Russian GDP. And everybody's saying, oh, EU is useless, because you see the sanctions are not affecting Russia at all. So this is just to say that the data that we use are, of course, derived from models and discussions. But as I said, I will come back at the last point, at the end of my presentation. We monitor what the EU is doing in terms of sustainable development goals using Eurostat data. We look at the individual targets, but we build also composite indicators. This is something that could be useful for your research activities. The dots are the EU countries. The lines are the composite indicators built on the Eurostat data. And as you can see, several of the composite indicators are almost flat or even going in the wrong direction, like in the case of Goal 15, the terrestrial ecosystem conditions. So using this kind of data is possible to trace not only trends, but also diversity and inequalities. The gray area should be reduced according to the motto of the 2030 Agenda, no one left behind, and this is not happening. Italy is not on a sustainable pathway as well. Actually, for 6 out of 17 goals, Italy is worse than in 2010. Poverty, systems, inequalities, and so on and so forth. And what we do for our country is to replicate the methodologies that I just mentioned. Here, the dots are the regions. But as I said today, the similar data were produced and published also at city level. So what I want to flag here is that it's possible to trace over time the SDGs, also in a way that is understandable by people, not just looking at 250 indicators altogether. Okay. The spring report published by us in May. When I say by us, ASVIS brings together more than 300 NGOs, business associations, trade unions, research institutes, and so on. In our working groups, work for free almost 1,000 people who contribute to writing our reports and other analytical papers and so on. In this last spring report, using the model developed by Oxford Economics, we looked at the trends to 2035 and 2050. And I'm just flagging the results based on 5 different scenarios. The first one is the baseline, just assuming that the national commitments made within COP and elsewhere are implemented. In this case, at the world level, we would have an increase of 1.9 degrees by 2050. Net zero is the scenario where the decarbonization happens, just decarbonization. In this case, we'll see the results. Net zero transformation is not only decarbonization, it's much more than that. It is an investment to change the system. In Rome, when I use the car, I spend almost 2 hours every day in the car because I live in the north of the city. My university is in the east, ASVIS is in the center, a nightmare, okay? So in the second scenario, net zero, all the cars will be transformed into electric cars, but I could continue to spend 2 hours in the car, okay? Net zero transformation is a big change in the way in which mobility works. Just to tell you the different scenarios. The fourth scenario, for those who know the Italian music, I call it the Pooh scenario. Pooh is a very famous band, and one of the very famous songs is I Will Think Tomorrow. Ci penserò domani. Beautiful song, but the idea, just to be more serious, is that this is the scenario of NIMTO. Maybe you know the NIMBY syndrome, not in my backyard. NIMTO is not in my term of office. Not when I am head of the government or a CEO. I will think about this in 5 years' time. So it's just the fourth scenario is a delay of 5 years of transition, keeping the objectives of net zero in 2050. And then finally is the climate catastrophe. So you can look at the chart on the right hand side, where you see that at the world level, just having the carbon, zero carbon decarbonization produces a reduction of GDP. Slight reduction, not very large. And why is that? Because if we want to have a capitalistic system, we have to impose carbon taxes. Carbon taxes increase inflation, therefore reduces consumption and income. In a nutshell, this is the chain that leads to this kind of result, in line with what the IMF, World Bank scenarios tell us. But if we go for the net zero transformation, then the result becomes positive, even in the short run. For Italy, this means that net zero may lead to -1% of GDP in 2035, and then an increase in 2050. If we go to net zero transformation, even in 2035, we could have a positive trend in terms of GDP. Delayed transition, very bad choice. Why? Because companies cannot stay just waiting and see. They have to do investments, and if they do wrong investments, they have to renovate their plants before the end of the life of the new investments, and this increases the cost of capital. Catastrophic scenario, as you can see, big reduction. Oh, by the way, in the last year report with by economic institutes, by governments and so on, the GDP goes to zero at the world level in 2010. Should I repeat? It goes to zero. Why? Because, of course, with 5 degrees, agriculture would not work anymore. Infrastructures would not work anymore. Transports would not work anymore. So the idea that we are going to face a disaster for economic reasons, not only for environmental reasons, is very serious. These are the impact on different sectors of the economy, and you can immediately see here the problem that we have to address, the loss of oil and gas, and of course transform this into a positive transformation of the energy sectors towards renewables. One point I would like to flag to you, very important, we have a lot of data in Italy that show that companies that have decided to invest in sustainability, contrary to the legend that we hear every single day, increase productivity, increase competitiveness, and not decrease. And for many years, we had data that were developed by the Italian Statistical Office and banks and so on, but they were let's say, suffering of the problem that I just mentioned before, is the simultaneity of the data. So it was very difficult to understand whether the most sustainable were also the most innovative, or whether the most innovative were the most sustainable. With this study, based on the overall census of Italian firms, especially manufacturing firms, we know now that comparing what the companies have done in 2016-18 and the subsequent years in terms of value added, other things equal, clearly identifies that companies who have a very high profile of sustainability, according to the indicators used by the statistical office, increased the GDP, actually the value added, by 16.7% more than companies who didn't invest in statistics, in sustainability. And those who have a medium level of sustainability, only, let's say, 5.2 more than the others. So, unfortunately, the first group is only 71.1% of the manufacturing companies, and the second group is 36.2%. As I said, all this data come from real data, not from polls or opinion polls. And this is extremely important. I'm using quite often these those in favor of sustainability win for a while, and then the others reorganize themselves and then fight, and they look winning. And you see those volatility before the change happens. The good news is that according to this report, if you add 20–30% of a population, people, companies, countries, then this is enough to change the regime. And this is a word of hope, if you wish, because it's clear that we are in the middle of this volatility period. And this is why we, sustainability, as I said, is still alive, and we have to work to fight against these trends. And if you wish, during the discussion, we can go deeper in that. I believe that what we are seeing here is a historical fight between the US capitalism, an attempt in EU to have a different capitalism, and the Chinese capitalism. But we can come back on that if you wish. Let me conclude with the work that the JRC we have done over the last couple of years to go beyond GDP. You may have heard about this for, at least I'm dealing with this over the last, for 25 years. When I was at the OECD, we launched the global project on measuring the progress of societies, the OECD Global Fora, on these issues. And at the European level, we have, over the last few years, done this work with the team of the JRC to measure sustainable and inclusive well-being. And this is based on the best available research worldwide. A lot of papers have been recently published also in Science and other journals that summarize the work that has been doing by several research teams around the world. What we have developed is not only a framework, but a set of measures of sustainable and inclusive well-being, looking at both inclusive well-being today and inclusive well-being tomorrow. And these are the different domains that we considered. So you have the current well-being, where you have material living conditions, productive and other main activities, health, leisure and social interactions, governance and basic rights, natural and living environment. This is about the current well-being. Then we consider the different elements that tell you whether you have a future or not. Suppose to drive a car. When we drive a car, we become intelligent. When we talk about economics, we become stupid. When we talk about economics, we want to have one single number. While when we drive the car, we are able, incredibly, to look at speed, the tank, the balance of the different tires, the overall capacity of the system to work, and we are able to read this kind of different. But when we talk about economics, no, we must have one single number. So consider this as a sort of dashboard of your car. On the left-hand side, you have the speed. And then you have the human capital, social capital, and economic capital, which is about how much gasoline or battery or whatever you have to get where you want to go. And then you have the inclusiveness as a sort of balance of the different tires, because otherwise your driving is very complicated. And then you have the resilience, which is about the ABS, the capacity of managing shocks, or the radar that tells you that you are at risk, and so on and so forth. Beside the conceptual points, these are the results. The blue line, or green, or whatever you want to call it, is GDP per capita. The dotted black line is the current well-being, which, as you can see, for the European Union is much better than GDP. Then, when you look at sustainability and inclusiveness, the situation gets worse, which means that we are delivering, or we have been delivering quite good results, but we are not investing enough in our future, in inclusiveness, and this explains maybe where we are today, also in political terms. The good news is that in the Pact of the Future, signed by UN countries in September 2024, just before the elections in the United States, the UN got finally, after 25 years, a mandate to go beyond GDP. So the Secretary General has established a high-level group, 13 people, to deliver a report by April that should go to the General Assembly before the end of August, and see whether the report will be adopted or not. We have, as a group, decided, you can go on the website HLAG UN Beyond GDP. We have released at the occasion of the Doha Social Summit a few weeks ago an interim report, and I'm very pleased that the headline, let's say, of what we want to measure is sustainable and inclusive well-being, which is, by the way, exactly the title of the Italian system that we developed in 2010, Benessere Equo e Sostenibile. We are working on how to do that. We made some progress. Tomorrow we will have another plenary meeting in the afternoon European time. It's just to say that I'm confident that this will produce something that can change the course of the discussions. And in this respect, and this is my very last point, I don't know if you have read the book, The Power of a Single Number, which describes the story of GDP. In 1944, the US government, the British School on National Accounts, and Kuznets and the others from the American school, they were locked in Washington in a meeting room like this one for a couple of days until the decision was made, because Middlestone from one side and Kuznets on the other side had different views on how to build GDP. And finally, the US government decided to go for the British approach, with the idea of imposing through the Bretton Woods institutions this system, accounting system, to the entire world. They decided to go for the British solution based on the amount of production. And Kuznets, although in all economic textbooks is quoted like the father of GDP, was the loser. And he was not even invited to the second meeting. He was pushing to have an approach based on consumption and well-being. Why did the US government decide to go for the British solution? Because they wanted just to demonstrate that capitalism was able to produce more stuff than communism, period. That was their political problem. And 80 years later, we are more or less still stuck with this idea. So just going back to Einstein's sentence, the first slide, unless we change our way of thinking, we will not fix the dramatic and existential problems that we are before us. Thank you very much.
Enrico, thank you very much for this inspiring talk. Do we have 5 minutes for questions? Yeah, fantastic. So I have one question from Stephen, Yara, and anybody else?
Hello.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's just a reflection. So basically, it's been a failure, hasn't it, to get rid of GDP? But the main thing is whether we can have a single measure rather than these complicated dashboards. For me, that's a key issue. And I just want to relate my experience working for the Commission of Gross National Happiness. I led a high-level EU mission to Bhutan. And we thought we came up with something quite good when we asked the farmers and the people of Bhutan if there's only one thing we can measure. And that was, please, can the government give us meaningful jobs? If there's only one thing the government can do, can they give us meaningful jobs? What is the number of meaningful jobs? So that's one quantitative indicator, the number, but then we added a scorecard of quality. So in Buddhist terms, a meaningful job means you're not going to destroy the planet, you're not going to make someone's life worse. And I thought that was an incredible hybrid. One quantitative indicator and one number from the scorecard, which is the qualitative indicator. I just wondered if you could reflect on that with this new work for moving forward.
Well, I was in Bhutan in 2013 with other experts, and we produced the report on the new development paradigm that went to the UN at the time, and it was a great experience, especially as we found finally a solution on the map that the chart that you find that report, and there are pictures where with a piece of wood, I was drawing the solution on the sand while we were waiting for meeting the king for a tea in the afternoon. You are dealing with very important points, and for years I've been puzzled by to use the dashboard or composite and so on. My final conclusion so far is this one: that you must have something that can compete also in the communication terms to GDP, which is the current well-being. And then, if, as we want to look at also inclusiveness or equity and sustainability, we have again to have something like this that tells you the story that you are eating your future. Because you see, it's very simple here. The current well-being, great. If you look at what you are doing in those terms, much worse. The high-level group is discussing these right now. We had a seminar last week. We'll see the discussion tomorrow. It looks like they embraced at least the idea of building a composite for the current well-being. But how to do it, which set of weights you have to use, using one theory or the other, and so on, still very debated. The funny thing, after, as I said, many experiences in Canada and many other places, is that, is there anything in your life that you care if it increases by 0.5 or 0.9% per year? Why are we obsessed with the decimals, with the GDP? Now, of course, I know why. But it's just to say how biased we are in measuring what we should measure.
Much, Professor Giovannini. I think a lot of your reflections turn around the idea of cost of inaction and the profits of action. Currently, I think most developed countries and developing ones are still in the narrative of the cost of action and the lack of profits from the inaction. And so I'm wondering, for a room such as this one with, you know, very highly qualified economists and multidisciplinary actors, what is your message to those who have been working in this field for a long time, in terms of how do you cut through having, you know, on the basis of the evidence, on the basis of the data, what have we gotten wrong in you know, in this journey, and what other lessons can we learn from movements such as the global public goods you know, economic push forward? I think Jayati Ghosh and others who have been quite successful at establishing such ideas within the mainstream, within decision makers.
Okay, one of actually my very first job at the Italian Statistical Office in 1983 was to compute the quarterly GDP. And after doing quarterly GDP, you can do quarterly whatever you wish, okay? Because it's clear that you are using models, econometric techniques, to try to approximate as at your best something that you don't know. Now, the whole system of national accounts is full of hypotheses that normally users don't know at all. But nobody cares, because that has been recognized as a shared piece of knowledge, like the fact that the sun is stable and the earth goes around. Don't ask me why, but it's that. The point is that among the hypotheses that national accounts use is the capacity of prices of describing the real willingness to pay or the real trade-offs. And the cost of inaction, as we don't have markets for everything, is very difficult to estimate. And the key point is the discount rate that you're using. At the end of the day, this is the point. So you would need a lot of shadow prices that we don't have. And then anyway, you have to look at your discount rate to balance the current costs and the future costs. We are facing now in Italy a big challenge, because under pressure of the Alliance for Sustainable Development and during the Draghi's government, also for serendipity, when I was minister there, we changed our constitution, the fundamental principles of the constitution, which now says the Republic protects environment, biodiversity, and ecosystems, also in the interest of future generations. Moreover, just 3 weeks ago, a new law was passed, again on our pressure, that says that any new legislation now has to be tested before being voted in terms of generational and intergenerational social and environmental impacts. Wow. How to do it? Okay. this is something on which we are working. But the point is all around the discount rate. Just to, if you have time, you can find it. It's not long. But in September 2015, just before the adoption of the SDGs, we wrote with some friends. We were in Bhutan just a couple of years earlier. We wrote an article on The Guardian, and the title is Say Goodbye to Capitalism and Say Welcome to the Republic of Wellbeing, where we listed 7 actions, including put the concept of sustainability into the Constitution, evaluate all the new legislation before the adoption, develop indicators. So a sort of menu for a brand new country that wanted to implement the 2030 agenda. So after, in a way or the other, implemented all these elements, it's clear that we didn't fix the problem. But let me conclude with one important comment, I think, is that at the end of the day, these are political choices. Courts are becoming more and more relevant. You know, the climate litigation is becoming more and more relevant. In Italy, the Constitutional Court used the new constitution to manage, in particular, a trial of a company, very polluting oil company in Sicily, that was closed by a judge. And then the government decided to reopen it in the name of strategic autonomy. The court said the decree is against the Constitution. Why? Because it didn't mention the time by which the plant had to be transformed, not to be polluted. This is a good example of a transfer of externalities to internal accounts of the company, which is exactly one of the points of our system of accounts, also at the micro level. So, as you can see,
thank you very much for this inspiring talk. Actually, you convey also a message of hope, like sustainability is still alive and so on. And I get the point about like GDP, since we are obsessed with GDP, and then it's actually an issue related to the excessive capitalism that's going on, and that's our core problem. And we need to shift towards a system that values something else, and hopefully we get there, and then shift through the system and a new capitalism version of the Europe. But the problem that I see is that, okay, now all of the decision-making and political will is in the hands of those who are the richest. Take the example of Trump being elected in the US president, and also lobbying power of the richest people in the world. I mean, it's increasing by day. So my problem is that I see the problem, and I think we should go in that direction, but where we are going is the opposite direction. Like money is getting more and more power, even at the decision-making level. So how this transition can happen? Anytime soon or anytime in medium, long run?
in my research activities, I was not able to build a crystal ball to answer this kind of, but I hope that your group will be able to do it. Of course, we have to keep fighting. Because these problems are not disappearing only because the President of the United States says that climate change doesn't exist, and so on and so forth. Of course, I'm very worried. I'm even scared. But to a certain extent, this is a dramatic joke, I know, because in 1975, when I was a student at the second year of economics, I read a book based on the famous Kleber-Rome report, The Limits to Growth, that was in one of the scenarios showing that between 2020 and 2030, the world would have been a big mess for other reasons, not because of Trump, of course. And the risk was to lose 2 billion people by now, between now and the end of the century. And if you look at the real data compared to those scenarios, you are completely shocked because you cannot recognize almost the difference. Not necessary for the reasons that were identified at the time, but I was really impressed by the fact that they were using the global model, non-linear, integrating economic, social, environmental dimensions. And the new version of world model, I think is World 3 now, Carlo, used for the book Earth for All, is much better because it shows also the risk of having feedback loops on the societal and the institutional instability. Because we shouldn't forget the institutional side is as important as the other three elements. So we played a little bit with some elasticities to show how the institutional instability could become social unrests and so on and so forth. And it is describing what is going on not only in US, but also in other countries. And let me just conclude suggesting you to read the book by Zygmunt Bauman, Retrotopia, that was published years ago, to which I tried to answer with my Sustainable Utopia just a couple of years later. But those elements that Bauman was talking about, which are deeply rooted in our psychological, social psychological dimensions, what makes us fearing of the others, what makes us unsecure and therefore asking for the big man or woman to fix our problems. This is exactly what we are in the midst of. So there are issues that are very difficult and very profound, and this makes me quite scared. Again, I don't know. What I know is that we have to do our best and even more than that to avoid that scenario.
But a crisis is there are always opportunities after a crisis. So if we survive,
normally tell ourselves
yes,
to resist. You know, there is a fantastic sentence that the greatest demonstration of the existence of God is that we have been designed to restart every single morning, no matter the way in which you go to bed. So you go to bed thinking, oh, it's the end, and then miraculously the following morning you start again.
Because we have a power of the brain, which when we sleep, we clean up everything and we start from scratch. And this is why sleeping is so important.
Just let me add a comment that maybe is a bridge between these two last intervention, because first of all, Enrico, when you show your slide the net zero transformation scenario, no, that evoked to us that we are working on this concept of regenerative economy. We use another terminology, net positive, or beyond net zero, for saying that the real shift in the mentality that would be needed is from concentrating on reducing the damage or zeroing the damage of your own activity toward creating opportunity for the others in the system to create a positive environmental and social benefit. And this is also a criteria for measuring this transition to the regenerative economy that we are considering. The criteria being not only achieving the break-even of the net zero, but to measure what social and environmental impacts your activity is creating in the system. The problem of how to measure that is all there, but I think that to combine, or at least to know that there are parallel efforts from several groups for doing that direction and to bridge between us, I think will be very useful. The other comment that I want to do is related to the question of EMANES. When we worked for the ESPON project on the quality of life, one of the recommendations at the end was for creating a quality of life in the territory, you need to create participatory process and to have a structure of that. Living labs where people can discuss what is happening and what could be the future. So future thinking living labs. And it's very important that the scientific evidence goes in that direction also, because you have presented the very basic Wikipedia description of complex systems. You have just said that World 3 model was behind the limit of growth work, and actually that was a dynamics model, so was applying complex system model. In principle, even a complex system can be described in simple terms. It's very important because you need to understand what are the feedbacks and the consequences to understand how the system works. This should be not something that remain confined into the scientists that develop the models. To bridge those that are developing the models with really not only the decision makers in a technical room, but also with the population, creating moments of involving and discussing with the citizens, is one of the ways for really day by day trying to change the situation. Because if you change the mind of the people, you will reduce the risk of having Trumps and this kind of policymaker. It's the only way for contrasting, I think.
Yes, very briefly, the Italian Alliance for Sustainable Development brought over the last 10 years the education to sustainability in all schools by law, in universities, and so on and so forth. So I agree that you need not just to do research, but try also to change the culture. And for those who are interested, just to implement the Pact of the Future, that I would recommend you to read, we have launched the new project Ecosystem Future in order to bring the future or the futures at the center of the cultural and political discussion in Italy. We had a great day on the 2nd December, which is the Future Day according to UNESCO. And again, we are trying to bring the futures literacy in the schools, in universities, and we built the museum, the network of museums of the futures. 42 museums have now joined, waiting for the building a museum of the future, like in Dubai or Rio de Janeiro and others, Berlin. So I agree with you that it's not just a political game or the political leaders that have to be convinced, but without them, the daily disinformation, the daily messages that go against what we are talking about here are very difficult to contrast, and therefore you need both. And the last point that you made, yes, the model used, the general equilibrium model used by Oxford Economics were not allowing us to try to compute the overall impact of the different scenarios on well-being and sustainability, which, by the way, the World 3 model does for the Club of Rome. In fact, two different scenarios, too little, too late, and the other one, I don't remember the name of the scenario, which is the best one. GDP per capita is almost, so GDP is almost the same but the well-being changed dramatically because of the evolution of the population in the two different scenarios at world level, because of culture, because of education, because of other elements. I hope that in the spring report 2026, through a different general equilibrium model that brings together economic, social, environmental phenomena that we had already used in 2017, but was still too green, let's say green in the sense of too early. We should be able to do exactly what you said, using a model able to compute a sustainable and inclusive well-being outcome, not just GDP outcome, as I demonstrated to you in the recent scenarios.
Enrico, I think this is quite a word of, I wouldn't say hope, but rather that we can do much more in research to bring forward concepts of well-being. And thank you for mentioning the role of culture and education, because both also leverage on our powers as humans into creativity. And creativity is a product of our brain. And this also links me to a work that we're doing, economists together with neuroscientists, that we're trying to work together. And we have developed a concept called brain capital and brain economy, trying to really devise a brain positive economy. And this means also that this could be a lever that could change a bit that paradigm that you showed at the beginning of your slides, this human capital. So human capital is not anymore as a result, but it becomes much more a driver of our economies together with the nature capital. Of course, nowadays it's not only about the inbuilt capital in terms of the resources we have, but also taking into consideration the ecosystem services that nowadays we could, price with in a suboptimal way, but still we can do it. And this will bring us to another model which really values the ecosystem services of the planet, but also the value of our brains when we are born, but then beyond the fact that we have to learn certain skills for a labor market or for the economy as a whole, but also to live in a well-being approach, which is much more beyond what we've been doing for example, developing value added in an economy. And this is good, but it is not going to be the objective, but also almost becomes the sub-product. So it's a mean to an end, not an end ultimately. And I think if we understand this as economists and also as other disciplines, that we work together with other disciplines, like for example, neuroscientists, who nowadays they have reached a knowledge about the functioning of our brain, which is practically very advanced as compared to 20 years ago. So eventually this one could be one answer to the problem, to the societal problem, and at the same time, eventually, one could have the systemic approach, what we call the complex approach that you mentioned also at the beginning, and go back to solutions that may not be simplistic, but then they could be complex enough. And then with artificial intelligence, we can use artificial intelligence to make them applicable beyond our eventually capability of simplifying so much things. So I would like with this to close this keynote. Thank you very much for your time, for this inspiring discussion.